Ladies and gentlemen, good morning/afternoon/evening to each one of you. It is both a privilege and an honor to stand before you today and share something deeply personal. 5 habits that have genuinely changed my life. Not overnight, not magically, but gradually, steadily, and meaningfully. We all seek growth, happiness, and success in our own ways, but life doesn't transform through wishes. It transforms through our daily actions. The difference between who I was and who I am becoming rests in 5 simple but powerful habits. I hope that by the end of this speech, you'll find the motivation to adopt one, or maybe all, into your own life. Waking up early used to feel like punishment. The alarm clock would go off, and my first instinct was to hit snooze, roll over, and delay the start of the day. It was a habit of avoidance, not intention. I was reacting to life instead of creating it. But everything began to change when I made one decision: to wake up early and start my day with purpose. That one shift, simple on the surface, became the foundation of a complete transformation in my mindset, productivity, and inner peace. Starting your day with purpose isn't about becoming a morning person for the sake of trend or discipline alone. It's about taking control of your life one sunrise at a time. When you rise early, before the noise of the world seeps in, you create space for clarity. There's a calmness in the early hours that doesn't exist later in the day. No emails, no calls, no demands. Just you and your thoughts. In those quiet moments, I began to listen to myself. I could reflect on where I was going and why. I started journaling. I made time to meditate, to pray, to breathe. There was no rush, no panic, just presence. Before, my mornings were filled with anxiety. I'd wake up late, rush through routines, grab whatever I could for breakfast, and feel behind before the day even began. It felt like I was constantly catching up, never ahead. But once I committed to waking up earlier and giving myself that time, I noticed a shift in energy. I wasn't just preparing for the day, I was leading it. I became proactive rather than reactive. I had already met myself before I met the world. Productivity increased, but so did peace. I wasn't scrambling to make decisions. I had already mapped out my intentions, whether it was setting goals for the day or simply identifying one thing I was grateful for. Those few morning rituals gave me focus. I was no longer scattered in my thoughts. I had direction. I started using that time to learn something new, read a few pages of a book, listen to a podcast, or simply sit in silence and think. That sacred time made me sharper and more grounded. Starting your day with purpose also builds confidence. You keep a promise to yourself the moment you wake up. There's pride in that discipline. Every day that you choose to rise with intention, you affirm that your goals matter, that your peace matters, and that your time is valuable. It sets the tone for how you treat yourself for the rest of the day. Of course, it wasn't always easy. There were mornings I wanted to stay in bed, but over time, the habit stuck because I saw the results. I didn't need to win the entire day in the first hour. I just needed to own that hour. It became my anchor, especially during stressful times. Even when the day ahead was uncertain or overwhelming, I had that one consistent ritual that reminded me I was in control of how I showed up. What I've learned is that the way you begin your day often determines how you live it. Purpose isn't something that just happens, it's something you create. When you choose to wake up early and dedicate even a small portion of your morning to intentional action, you are declaring to the world and to yourself that you are serious about your life. That is powerful. And that power begins the moment you decide to rise. There was a time in my life when I felt stuck, mentally drained, emotionally stagnant, and uninspired. I wasn't necessarily doing anything wrong, but I wasn't doing anything that truly moved me forward either. It felt like I was repeating the same thoughts, facing the same struggles, and living inside the same limitations. What I didn't realize back then was that my mind was starving. I was feeding it noise, scrolling endlessly on social media, watching mindless entertainment, and surrounding myself with surface-level conversations. My thoughts were echoing what I consumed, and what I consumed wasn't helping me grow. Everything began to change when I adopted one simple but life-altering habit. I started feeding my mind daily. It didn't happen with some grand declaration or a massive overnight change. It started small. 10 minutes of reading in the morning, a motivational podcast during a walk, a few pages of a book before bed. But those small inputs began to shift my inner world. My mind was no longer idle. It was active, alive, and expanding. Reading became a source of power. It wasn't just about acquiring knowledge, it was about gaining new perspective. Books exposed me to ideas I'd never thought of, challenged my assumptions, and introduced me to thinkers who had walked paths I was just beginning to consider. With every page, I felt like I was having a conversation with someone wiser than me, someone who had something to teach. It humbled me and lifted me at the same time. Podcasts and audiobooks added another layer to my learning. They turned mundane moments into opportunities for growth. A commute became a classroom. A workout became a workshop. I found mentors in voices I'd never meet in person, but whose wisdom shaped my thinking. I stopped looking for entertainment and started seeking education. The content I consumed began to nourish me instead of distract me. As I fed my mind, I noticed my confidence grow. Not because I suddenly had all the answers, but because I started asking better questions. I engaged in deeper conversations. I became more curious, more thoughtful, more intentional with my words and actions. I wasn't just repeating what I heard. I was forming my own understanding of the world. That clarity of thought translated into clarity of purpose. The change wasn't just intellectual, it was emotional too. Feeding my mind with positivity, discipline, and resilience helped silence the inner critic that once held me back. I replaced negative self-talk with empowering beliefs. I realized that my mental diet was just as important as my physical one. What you consume mentally will shape how you feel, how you act, and what you become. But perhaps the most beautiful part of this habit is how it compounds. 10 pages a day might seem small, but over a year, it becomes several books. One inspiring idea can change the direction of your week. One quote can spark a shift in mindset, and one moment of clarity can lead to a lifetime of progress. Feeding your mind daily isn't about information overload. It's about intentional, consistent input that aligns with the person you want to become. Today, I am not the same person I was before I started this habit. I think differently. I speak with more conviction. I listen with more intent. My mind is not a place of doubt and distraction anymore. It's a space for creativity, focus, and peace. That transformation didn't come from one big moment. It came from showing up every day and choosing to feed my mind instead of letting it go hungry. And if it can change my life, it can change yours too. There was a time when I thought exercise was only about aesthetics, losing weight, building muscle, looking good in the mirror. And because I didn't see fast physical results, I gave up easily. I saw fitness as a chore, something to be done out of guilt rather than care. But everything changed when I stopped focusing on what it did to my body and started focusing on what it did to my mind. Moving my body daily became less about physical transformation and more about mental elevation. It became a therapy, a discipline, and a mindset shift that I never expected. It began with just 10 minutes a day, nothing intense or complicated. A walk, some stretching, or light movement. But those 10 minutes created momentum. And in that momentum, I found energy. I noticed I felt lighter, not just physically, but emotionally. My thoughts became clearer, my stress began to ease. I started approaching each day with more clarity and less tension. That small act of moving my body gave me something that coffee, comfort, and distractions never could. control over my internal state. Movement taught me resilience. On days when I felt mentally exhausted, when stress or self-doubt crept in, I used to retreat into stillness, lying in bed, overthinking, feeling defeated. But when I pushed myself to move, even when I didn't want to, I discovered strength I didn't know I had. Movement became my reminder that no feeling is final and that action is often the antidote to anxiety. When your body is in motion, your mind follows. I wasn't waiting to feel motivated. I was generating it through effort. Daily exercise became my mirror, not the kind that reflects appearance, but the one that reveals character. I saw my discipline or lack of it. I saw how I handled discomfort. I saw how I responded to challenge. Some days I pushed through, some days I struggled, but every day I showed up. And in that consistency, I rebuilt trust in myself. The same person who once said, "I can't stick to anything," was now showing up every single day, not perfectly, but persistently. I also began to notice how my mood improved. Movement releases endorphins, but it also releases mental blocks. When I felt stuck creatively or emotionally, a run or workout would shift my energy entirely. Ideas would come, solutions would surface, frustrations would fade. Exercise became my reset button. It wasn't about running from problems, it was about running through them, moving with intention, and proving to myself that I had the power to change how I felt, no matter how heavy the day felt. More importantly, daily movement reminded me that health is not a destination, it's a daily decision. It's not just about how long you live, but how well you live. Energy, focus, patience, and confidence all begin in the body. When I take care of my physical self, I become a better thinker, a better communicator, a better friend, and a better version of myself overall. This habit doesn't require a gym membership, expensive gear, or an athlete's routine. It just requires a choice, a decision to respect your body enough to move it, a decision to shift your state when your mind is spiraling, a decision to say, even if I do nothing else today, I will take care of me. Now, movement is no longer something I have to do, it's something I get to do. It's my anchor, my clarity, my power. If you want to strengthen your mind, start by moving your body. The transformation isn't just in how you look, it's in how you think, how you feel, and how you face life. For a long time, I was focused on what I didn't have. I thought about the opportunities I missed, the goals I hadn't reached, the setbacks that held me back. No matter how much I accomplished, it never felt like enough. I was stuck in a mindset of scarcity, always reaching, never resting. And then something simple, almost too simple, began to change everything. I started practicing gratitude. It began as a quiet experiment. Every morning, I would write down 3 things I was grateful for. They didn't have to be big. Sometimes it was a good cup of coffee, a kind message from a friend, or even the fact that I woke up. At first, it felt forced, even awkward. I was so used to looking for what was missing that I didn't know how to fully appreciate what was already present. But I stayed with it. Day by day, word by word, my perspective started to shift. Gratitude doesn't erase problems, but it changes how we see them. When I started focusing on what I had instead of what I lacked, I noticed that the same challenges that once overwhelmed me became more manageable. I wasn't ignoring reality. I was simply choosing to see it through a different lens. That lens brought peace, perspective, and a sense of abundance. I realized that joy isn't something you chase. It's something you recognize. It's already here, in the ordinary, in the overlooked, in the now. This shift in mindset began to affect every area of my life. I became more patient with people, more forgiving of myself, more present in moments I used to rush through. Instead of comparing myself to others, I started appreciating my own journey. Instead of being consumed by what I couldn't control, I focused on the many things I could, starting with my attitude. Gratitude also helped me silence the inner critic that often whispered I wasn't doing enough or being enough. It reminded me of how far I'd come, of the people who supported me, of the little wins that used to go unnoticed. That inner voice grew softer, and in its place came a quieter, stronger one, a voice of calm, of contentment, of clarity. I began to see gratitude as a practice, not just a feeling. It's a daily discipline, like exercising or eating well. Some days it comes naturally, other days, especially when life is messy and painful, it takes real effort. But those are the days when gratitude matters most. Because it's not about denying hardship, it's about refusing to let hardship define your entire outlook. Gratitude also deepened my relationships. When you're thankful, you express it more. You start saying thank you, not just out of politeness, but out of genuine recognition. You notice the good in others more easily. You become less reactive, more compassionate. Gratitude builds connection, not only with life, but with people. What I learned is this: gratitude isn't about pretending everything is perfect. It's about acknowledging that even in imperfection, there's still beauty. Even in struggle, there's still something to hold on to. It taught me to stop waiting for big milestones to feel happy. The little things, the moments, the gestures, the quiet victories matter more than I ever realized. Now, gratitude is my foundation. It's what I return to when life feels uncertain, when I'm tempted to complain or compare. It grounds me, it humbles me, and it reminds me that every day, no matter what's happening, there is something worth appreciating. Gratitude didn't just make me feel better, it made me be better. It shifted my mindset, and that shift changed everything. There was a time when I didn't give much thought to my environment. I assumed that as long as I worked hard and stayed focused, I could succeed regardless of what was around me. But over time, I started noticing something subtle but powerful. My thoughts, energy, and even my ambitions were being shaped by the people I spent time with, the content I consumed, and the atmosphere I placed myself in. I began to understand that environment isn't just where you are physically. It's everything that surrounds your mindset daily. And if you're not intentional about shaping it, it will shape you, often in ways you don't realize until it's too late. I looked around at the people in my life and noticed patterns. Some conversations lifted me while others drained me. Some friends encouraged growth while others mocked it. When I tried to improve myself, not everyone clapped. Some people felt threatened by change. Others simply didn't understand it. I realized that it's hard to become the best version of yourself when you're constantly surrounded by voices that remind you of who you've always been. Changing my environment didn't mean cutting everyone off. It meant redefining boundaries. I stopped seeking validation from people who didn't value growth. I spent less time in spaces where negativity was the norm. And I started intentionally placing myself around people and ideas that inspired me, whether it was listening to motivational podcasts, joining communities focused on self-development, or even curating my social media feed with positive content. Every small decision made a difference. The truth is, energy is contagious. If you're around complainers long enough, you start to complain. If you're surrounded by dreamers and doers, you start to dream bigger and take more action. Environment is not just influence, it's reinforcement. It reinforces your habits, your mindset, and your direction. That's why it's so important to surround yourself with people who remind you of your potential, not your past. Even the physical environment matters. A cluttered space can create a cluttered mind. I started organizing my surroundings, cleaning up my room, creating a space that felt peaceful, and removing distractions. It wasn't about aesthetics, it was about function. I needed an environment that supported focus, creativity, and peace. The change in my surroundings led to a change in my thoughts. I felt more in control, more energized, and more at peace. There's also something powerful about aligning your environment with your goals. If you want to read more, keep books in plain sight. If you want to work out consistently, keep your gear ready to go. If you want to stay focused, limit digital noise. Your surroundings should reflect the life you're trying to build, not the habits you're trying to break. What surprised me most was how quickly I started to feel different once I made these changes. I wasn't just thinking better, I was becoming better. My motivation increased, not because life got easier, but because I was finally in a space that supported my growth. And that made the hard work feel more possible. Your environment isn't everything, but it is the soil where your potential either grows or withers. No seed thrives in toxic soil, and no person grows in a toxic environment. If you want to change your life, change your surroundings. Be intentional about who you spend time with, what you allow into your mind, and where you invest your energy, because ultimately, you don't just rise to the level of your goals, you rise to the level of your environment. And when your environment reflects the future you want, not the past you're escaping, transformation becomes inevitable. For a long time, I believed success had to be dramatic. I thought it would come through one major breakthrough, a lucky opportunity, or a single big decision that would change everything overnight. I was always waiting for that perfect moment, that big chance to finally prove myself. But life had different lessons in store for me. It taught me that real success doesn't come in sudden waves. It's built slowly through small, consistent actions repeated over time. That realization didn't just change my results. It changed my mindset. I started noticing that the most successful people I admired all had one thing in common: consistency. They weren't necessarily the smartest or the most talented. They were just relentless. They showed up every single day, whether they felt like it or not. And while others were waiting for motivation, they were building discipline. That's when it hit me. Discipline is the quiet engine behind all progress. It doesn't shout. It doesn't look glamorous, but it moves you forward, inch by inch. At first, this idea felt too simple. I wondered how something so ordinary, doing the same thing daily, could lead to something extraordinary. But I gave it a try. I started small. I committed to reading 10 pages a day, writing a little each morning, exercising just 20 minutes. And what seemed insignificant at first slowly became powerful, not because the tasks were hard, but because I kept doing them even when it was easier to quit. Consistency creates momentum. The more you show up, the more confident you become. You begin to trust yourself. Your brain starts to believe, I am someone who follows through. And that belief spills into everything you do. Suddenly, you're not chasing motivation, you're creating it through your actions. And those actions begin to compound. What starts as 10 minutes of effort becomes a habit. That habit becomes a lifestyle. And that lifestyle shapes your identity. But here's what most people miss. Small actions only work if you stick with them. Too many give up because they don't see instant results. They want transformation without repetition. But success isn't found in what you do once. It's found in what you do daily, whether it's building a skill, improving your health, growing a business, or changing your mindset. It all comes down to what you're willing to do consistently, especially when it's not exciting. The beauty of this truth is that it puts success within everyone's reach. You don't need special talent or resources. You just need to be consistent. You don't have to take massive leaps every day. Just take small steps in the right direction and trust that those steps will add up, because they will. It's easy to overestimate what you can do in a day and underestimate what you can do in a year. I've looked back after just a few months of steady effort and realized how far I'd come. Not because I made huge moves, but because I made small ones every single day. That's the secret no one tells you. Success doesn't feel like winning. It feels like working. It feels like showing up when no one's watching. It feels like pushing through when no one is cheering. And it feels like choosing growth over comfort again and again. Now I live by this simple truth. Small actions, repeated daily, lead to big changes. Success isn't about intensity. It's about consistency. It's not about being perfect. It's about being committed. And it's not about doing everything. It's about doing the right things over and over until they create a life you're proud of. For most of my life, I chased perfection. I believed that if I couldn't do something flawlessly, it wasn't worth doing at all. I waited for the perfect timing, the perfect mood, the perfect plan. I obsessed over getting everything right, the exact words, the ideal conditions, the flawless outcome. And in doing so, I delayed progress. I avoided starting. I let fear of imperfection paralyze me. It wasn't until I shifted my focus to intention over perfection that everything began to change. Intentionality means showing up with purpose, with clarity, and with heart, even when things are messy. It means doing the best you can with what you have, where you are, instead of waiting for some imaginary version of ideal circumstances. It means choosing progress over paralysis. That shift in mindset freed me from the unrealistic pressure to be perfect, and instead it allowed me to become authentic and consistent. When you lead with intention, you stop being afraid of failure, because the goal is no longer to appear flawless, it's to grow. You stop focusing on the outcome and start focusing on the process. You learn to trust that imperfect action, taken with honest effort, will get you further than perfect plans that never leave your mind. This change is subtle but powerful. Perfection freezes you, intention moves you. There's a dangerous illusion in perfectionism. It disguises itself as ambition, but often it's just fear. The fear of not being good enough, the fear of judgment, the fear of making mistakes. And while it may seem like you're holding yourself to a higher standard, perfectionism often becomes the very thing that holds you back. It convinces you to keep editing instead of publishing, to keep planning instead of starting, and to keep doubting instead of doing. I used to think people would only respect me if I got it right all the time. But the truth is, people connect more with effort than they do with perfection. They resonate with real. They admire those who try, fail, learn, and try again. Intention shows up in the way you speak, act, create, and lead. It's not about pretending to have all the answers. It's about being honest about the journey. When I began to move with intention, I also started giving myself more grace. I stopped punishing myself for not hitting every target. I celebrated small wins. I honored the fact that growth takes time. I recognized that mastery is a byproduct of repetition, not flawlessness. With intention, every step, no matter how small or imperfect, became meaningful. This shift also helped me focus on what truly mattered. Perfection had me chasing things that looked good from the outside, but didn't fulfill me on the inside. Intention brought me back to my values. It reminded me to align my actions with my deeper purpose. It pushed me to create not just for approval, but from authenticity. It helped me say no to distractions and yes to what genuinely mattered. The truth is, perfection doesn't exist. There will always be something you could have done better, said clearer, or prepared more for. But don't let that stop you. The world doesn't need perfect people. It needs intentional ones. It needs people who care enough to try, to lead, to serve, and to improve, even if they don't get it right the first time. So now I remind myself daily, show up with intention, not pressure. Focus on being present, not perfect. Let effort outweigh ego. When you live with intention, you begin to move forward not because everything is perfect, but because you're aligned with purpose. And that's where true progress lives.